Hello everyone, Colin Canet here for Woodwork Web. Today we want to talk a little bit about drill bits and how to sharpen them. Most woodworkers have an array of drill bits that they work with, and the most popular is something called the twist bit, and we'll do some close-ups of these in a few minutes. They're the most popular, and they're the ones that we all seem to use the most, but there's all sorts of other different kinds here. Let's have a look at some drill bits that woodworkers use. Now, one of the things that makes drill bits dull in the first place is when you are cutting into metal, when you're drilling into metal with your drill press or with a hand drill, and you're cutting in, and if the bit, when it hits the metal, if it doesn't go in right away, sometimes it'll skittle around on top. That's a sign that the drill bit is not catching, and what's happening is the very tip of that drill bit is getting dull. So what you want to do is, next time you're at the hardware store, pick yourself up a little center punch and use it to put a very small divot into the steel or the metal that you're going to be drilling into. What will happen then is when the drill bit goes into that metal, once it gets into that little divot, and it doesn't take very much, it actually grabs right away and it will start twisting. It won't be skittling around on top of your metal, making the drill dull and making it frustrating for you to drill a hole in the precise place that you need. So that's one of the things that you can do to help prevent your drill bits from getting dull. The most popular bit for most woodworkers is the simple twist bit, and it's a general purpose bit. These are actually for metal and for wood, and they're relatively inexpensive. Many years ago, before the advent of power drills and so on, these were what woodworkers used in a hand bit. And you can see that this one here has actually been, the end has been cut off or sawn off so that it could be used in a hand drill or a cordless drill, a power drill. The advantage of these kinds of drills is you can see the very end, it actually has a screw so that when it goes into the wood, it actually grabs the wood and pulls itself into the wood. If you have a power tool with a bit like this, it can get away on you, especially if it's a big, powerful drill. So these are not really an option that we look at. This is the same concept of this old brace and bit type wood bit. And this is a modern bit. This is an Irwin bit. It also has the screw right in the end. The difference with this one, it has a little bit different, you can see there's a little bit different makeup. And although this one actually grabs the wood and pulls it into the wood, because it has a little bit different makeup, it doesn't tend to get away on you as much as these older bits can. The advantage of both of these bits is they help the woodworker when you're drilling lots of holes. They actually pull themselves into the wood. These are particularly useful if you're an electrician or a plumber and drilling a lot of holes through 2x4s and 2x6s. This is what this is for. If you're furniture making, this is probably not a drill that you would use. A drill that you also would use if you were an electrician or a plumber are these SPADE bits. And although there's machines that can sharpen these, you can actually sharpen these by hand. They're pretty simple to sharpen by hand. Now, one of the popular bits for woodworkers are these FORSTNER bits, and they're a little bit more complex. You can see that there's a couple of cutting edges, there's some shoulders, and there's a very sharp tip right at the very end. These can also be very carefully sharpened by hand. Another popular bit for woodworkers are these brad bits, and if you look closely at them, you'll notice on the end there's a very, very fine tip. They're a little bit like a Forstner bit because they have a little bit of a shoulder and they have a little bit different angle too. When you look at that compared to a twist bit, you can actually see that there's some differences right on the tip, and we'll get some close-ups of these in a moment so you can see. So that's another type of brad tip. Now all of these bits need to be sharpened from time to time, and today we're going to be using the Drill Doctor, the 3500. This is their entry model, and we're going to show you how we can sharpen these, the most popular twist bits, and we'll also show you how you can very carefully with some of these hand sharpen some of these other bits. Okay, there's the two, I guess what we would call construction bits, and you can see this old style how the twists are quite, there's quite an angle to them compared to the newer one, how the angle is much less, so that when it goes into the wood it doesn't tend to grab quite as much. But both of them, you can see they both have a screw end on the at the very tip, and that's to help pull the bit into the wood. And these are the SPADE bits, and you can see they come in a variety of sizes. I've got a 7/16 here and a 7/8, and these are fairly easy to sharpen because they just have a tip, a straight tip, and if that gets dull you can sharpen that with a simple file, just a hand file, just sort of put an edge back on that. And the very shoulders here, if they get dull, again with a very fine file, you can actually resurface these, and you don't have to take very much off them as a rule. Just a little bit, just touching them sometimes with a file will sharpen them up to make them really start working the way they did when they were new. So very simple to sharpen those kinds of bits. These are Forstner bits, and you can see they also come in a variety of different sizes, and they also can be hand filed, hand sharpened, and they're fairly simple in their structure. The main cutting surface are these two cutting edges right there and right there, and there's a shoulder on each side. These shoulders sometimes will get dull, and they can be just very easily and very lightly touched up with a file. Sometimes even some kinds of sharpening papers is all you need to just sort of touch those areas. And again, the cutting surface there, you don't want to, you need to make very sure that you don't change the angle, but that you very lightly can just tighten those edges up so they're a little bit sharper just by a very small amount of filing on there. As you get down the very small bits, you can see this is going to be a little bit more of a challenge. And those are Forstner bits. So what we're here today really to talk about is sharpening these simple and very common twist bits. I've got a couple of different shanks here. This is just a round shank on this one, very common twist bit. This one is also a twist bit, but it has a hex shank on it. So this would be for some of the more common, up-to-date power drills, cordless drills that have hex chucks on them. So let's have a look at the anatomy of a twist bit. Let's take a look for a minute at the anatomy of a drill bit. Now this is the tip of a drill. These angled lines here, they are the cutting edge of the drill bit. That's the part that you're going to be sharpening, because that's the part that is cutting into the material. This dual line coming down here is what they call the leading edge, and it's the part that once the drill has cut into the material, it helps to cut more material and to pull it away, and that's what helps to pull the material out as you're cutting it. Now these different angles, there are different angles that you can make on drill bits, on twist bits, and if you were a machinist, that would be important to you, because you might be cutting aluminum or mild steel, hard steel, brass. All of those work better with different angles, but we're woodworkers, so we can get by with a general purpose twist bit, because sometimes we're cutting into metal and often we're just cutting into wood, which compared to metal is very, very soft. But it's important to have sharp bits, particularly for those times that you are cutting into metal. And that's what we're going to do, is sharpen the leading edge. Now if you look at the very end of a drill bit and look at it like that, this is what it looks like. Now the trick that I use to find out if I've sharpened the drill properly, all of this area in blue, this is the cutting edge. This is the part and the only part that's going to get sharpened. And it's going to very, very finely get ground down. But it's a very small area, and sometimes it's hard to see. So what I do is, with a felt pen, I actually go in and mark the very end of that tip, and I'll show you close up in a second, so that I can see as I'm grinding how much of that felt tip coloring has been taken away, so that I know when that drill bit is sharpened fully. There's the very end of that drill bit, and what I'm going to do is just blacken this very end, the cutting edge on both sides, so that when I sharpen it, I can actually see the coloration taken off, so that I know that that drill bit has been sharpened from the edge right to the center. Now this is the starting model for the Drill Doctor. They call it the 350X, and we've been using this now for a year, and we really like this little sharpener. It will sharpen from 3/32 of an inch up to 1/2 an inch, and when we get bigger than 1/2 an inch, we typically are using a FORSTNER bit anyway, so we don't really need a bigger unit than this. Now if you look inside, you'll notice that through this area in here where we will be putting the bit to get sharpened, if you look in there, you can actually see there's a little carbide tipped wheel in there. And in a moment we're going to plug this unit in, and we'll actually start sharpening our first bit. Now in order to get started, they give you a chuck like this, and if you look closely, you'll see that there's a couple of little fingers on this chuck, and you insert the drill bit into it, and you put it so that you can move the drill bit back and forth with your fingers, not loose enough that it will fall out, but just tight enough that you can move it back and forth. And then, with the unit still turned off, you insert this into the unit, and the reason that you do that is to seat that drill in the chuck, and with it still seated, you actually tighten that up, and it's very easy to do. You tighten that drill bit in that chuck, and then when you're ready to start, there's little marks on there. When you're ready to start actually sharpening that bit, you align that to this area right here and give it a half turn. That sharpens 1/2 of that cutting edge. Then you twist it on the second half, and that sharpens the second half. Now, with smaller bits, you can usually 2 or 3 turns, depending on how dull they are, 2 or 3 turns usually sharpens that bit. This is a 1/2 inch bit, so it's going to take a few more turns, but because it was already sharp when we started, we're going to be looking for, and we'll give you some close-ups of that felt pen mark on the very cutting edge being taken off. So let's plug this unit in and let's start sharpening. Now, there's the very tip, and you can see that we actually sharpened one side, but the other side has not been touched yet. Now, I'm going to reseat this drill bit because it looks like we were a little bit off in the reseating, or in the seating of it. So one side is actually almost perfectly sharp now. There's a little bit at the top that needs to be touched up yet, and the other side still needs to be sharpened. So let's reseat this and resharpen, and we'll get both sides equal. Okay, we've reseated the bit. Let's put that back in and continue our grinding. And there you can see the twist bit finally sharpened. You notice there's no black on the leading edge down here. And how shiny and glossy that leading edge is. There. A perfectly sharp twist bit. Now, I've had a number of people say, well, why would you bother? Despite the fact this is a fairly inexpensive little tool, drill bits are pretty inexpensive, especially small ones, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/8, 1/16. They're relatively inexpensive bits. You can get more expensive ones, but you can get pretty inexpensive bits. There's a couple of things. First of all, some of the bits that you buy, if you're buying really inexpensive bits, I've seen some of them that come out of the factories. They're not very sharp. There's not very much care put into the manufacture of some of those bits. So when you buy them, they may not be very sharp. Now the other thing is not really the cost of the drill bit. If I'm making something and cutting something and I find that my drill bit is not sharp, if I have to stop and go and get a drill bit somewhere, or stop my project because I don't have the right drill bit, that can cost me a lot of time. So these kinds of tools actually save you time, not necessarily in the purchase of the drill bit, but in the time that it takes to do a better job. all in all, we quite like the little Drill Doctor 350X. It's a great little tool, relatively inexpensive, and it saves us a lot of time in keeping our drill bits sharp. The replacement wheel is available if you find you're using a loader with bigger bits and you need another carbide wheel. You can just replace it, so it'll last you a long time. So, I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web, and that's a sampler on how to sharpen drill bits.